John looked at Jake, the child he had mentored for years, now standing at the podium in a leadership role. But then an unexpected question made him stop in his tracks. Am I truly ready to let go? Could Jake become the one to replace John? But the truth is, an unexpected event will change everything, and it might force John to confront something he never saw coming. Jake, a 13-year-old homeless boy, was used to wandering the streets, picking up cans and plastic bottles to earn a few coins to take care of his sick mother. Little did he know, in just one fateful night, he would risk his life to save a millionaire teetering on the brink of despair. A bridge, a split-second decision, and the next morning the entire city would be shocked by what happened. As Jake weaved through the dark alleys, the fabric bag on his back swayed with his steps, the clinking sound of recyclables echoing, a constant reminder of this miserable life he led. He looked up at the overcast night sky, where the city lights had swallowed every star. He had no idea his life was about to change forever. "You're late," Sarah's voice rasped, weak, as if every word she uttered took all her strength. "I've been so worried." Jake quickly dropped his bag in the corner of the tent, offering a reassuring smile. "I just wanted to collect more than yesterday. You know, the more I gather, the better the sale," he said, his voice trying to mask the worry gnawing at him. He moved closer, studying her closely. Her face was even paler than yesterday. "You look worse. How do you feel?" Sarah tried to sit up, but a fit of coughing seized her, draining the last remnants of her strength. She staggered slightly, but Jake was quick to place his hand on her back, steadying her. "Don't worry about me," Sarah gasped between coughs. "You've done so much already. I should be stronger." "You are strong," Jake interrupted firmly. "You've raised me all by yourself, remember? And I promised I'd take care of you, no matter what." Sarah forced a faint smile, but the corners of her eyes were wet. "You're still just a kid. You shouldn't have to carry all this. Life's just so unfair to you." Jake shook his head, opened a bottle of water, and lifted it to her lips. "Fair or not, this is our life. But I'm going to change it. One day, we'll leave this place, Mom, I swear." The night wind howled through the tattered tarps, creating an eerie sound. The two of them sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. Jake turned away, rummaging through the things he had collected today. A dented soup can, his most prized possession of the day. He placed it over the small fire, waiting for the faint bubbles of boiling water to form on the can's edge. Sarah, trying to sound calm, spoke up, attempting to break the heavy silence. "So, what did you find today?" "A few bottles, some bits of metal, probably enough to make a few bucks," Jake replied, his gaze still fixed on the flame. "Oh, and a piece of bread someone tossed away, still good." He held up the bread like it was a treasure. "You should eat it all. You need it more than I do," Sarah said softly, but there was a quiet firmness in her tone. "No way! We'll share." Jake smiled, pretending he'd already eaten. "Besides, I already ate on my way back." Sarah looked at him, knowing it was a lie. But she didn't argue. She was too tired to fight. The soup began to release a faint, savory aroma. He carefully ladled out a small bowl and handed it to her. Each spoonful she brought to her lips seemed like an effort, as though eating itself was a struggle. He sat beside her quietly, watching. "Do you remember our little apartment before everything fell apart?" he asked, his voice low. A glimmer of light passed through Sarah's eyes. She nodded, as though a whole world of memories had just opened up. "I remember. You loved that old couch so much. You'd sit there for hours reading," she said, her voice distant, as if remembering a different time. Jake smiled, but his voice grew heavier. "I wish I could bring it back for you." Sarah shook her head, her trembling hand gripping his. "I don't need a couch or books. I just need you." Outside, the wind howled again, cutting through the night. Jake pulled the thin blanket over his mother, trying to keep her a little warmer. He lay down, staring at the patched-up roof of their tent, his mind wandering through endless thoughts. Tomorrow would be another long day, but no matter what, he whispered, his voice so quiet only the wind could hear. "I'm going to change this life. I have to." Jake's heart felt heavy, but he had no time to be sad. Sarah was waiting for him, and the day was still long. Jake quickly walked toward a busy shopping area, where store owners often left behind old crates and discarded items. But Jake wasn't the only one there. Other scavengers had already arrived early, some older, more experienced than him, others smaller, no different than Jake. He tried to find a hidden corner to work without drawing attention. Just then, he spotted Tommy. The old man was squatting beside a pile of scrap, carefully sorting each piece. Anyone who had lived on these streets for long knew Tommy. He had gray hair, a face full of wrinkles, marks from decades of wandering, but in his eyes there was still a sharpness, a kind of clarity that time hadn't dulled. "Hey kid, come here." Tommy spoke, but his eyes never left the pile of metal in front of him. Jake hesitated for a moment, but then walked closer. "You're doing it wrong." Jake furrowed his brows. "Wrong?" "Yeah. It's not about digging around randomly. What matters is knowing what to look for," Tommy said, lifting up a shiny piece of aluminum. "Look at this. Light, but worth more than most of the junk you're going to find." Jake nodded, watching every movement of the old man. It was like Tommy knew every scrap like an old friend. "Thanks," Jake muttered, picking up a nearby soda can and holding it up to the light to check it. Tommy chuckled softly, finally glancing up at him. "You're new at this, huh? How old are you?"
13, Jake replied cautiously. Tommy snorted. 13, and living like a 50-year-old. He smirked, but his tone carried a bitter edge. "The streets are ruthless, kid. If you let them swallow you, they'll never spit you out." Jake looked up at him, a strange feeling swelling in his chest. "But what makes me different from everyone else?" Tommy nodded slowly. "Survival instinct." His voice grew serious, lower. "That's what makes the difference." The two continued working beside each other, saying little more. Tommy showed Jake a few tricks: how to spot valuable metal, how to avoid dangerous areas in dark alleys and old trash bins. Despite his rough words, Jake could feel the sincerity and care hidden beneath them, something he rarely got from others. As the sun began to set, Tommy rummaged through his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of aluminum, handing it to Jake. "It's not much, but consider it a start." Jake took it, surprised. "Thank you." Tommy shrugged. "Just call me Tommy." He looked Jake in the eyes. "And be careful. These streets don't forgive the careless." Jake nodded, clutching the piece of aluminum in his hand like it was precious. He continued his journey, but something inside him had changed. His bag slowly grew heavier, not just with the things he collected, but with something intangible, a sense of hope. He kept repeating Tommy's words in his head, feeling a bit of comfort from the old man's wisdom. The warmth from the small fire was only enough to chase away the cold for a moment, but it couldn't conceal the anxiety gnawing at Jake's heart. He looked at his mother, her gaunt face showing the weariness of too many hard days. Sarah closed her eyes for a second, then opened them slowly, her voice thick with emotion. "You deserve a better life than this, but I can't give it to you." Jake stayed silent. He knew exactly what his mother was feeling. He knew she blamed herself, but he wouldn't let her keep torturing herself with guilt. He bent down and kissed her forehead gently. "You've already given me everything that matters. I'll take care of the rest." Outside, the night had fully swallowed the sky, but somewhere out there, something was about to change. Something Jake couldn't even foresee. An encounter that would alter his fate forever. Jake stepped out of the narrow alley, the empty bag swinging from his shoulder. He'd scavenged enough for the day, but the money he'd get from selling it wouldn't be much.
The cold wind cut through his thin jacket, making him huddle into it for warmth. The city was eerily quiet at night, with only the dim glow of streetlights and the occasional car speeding by on the distant road. He pulled the old blanket tighter around Sarah, adjusting it carefully to make sure she stayed as warm as possible. He lay beside her, eyes fixed on the patched-up ceiling of the tent, where small tears let in glimpses of the night sky. The wind howled through the gaps, carrying with it a bone-chilling cold. But to Jake, the sound of the wind was nothing compared to the weight of the thoughts pressing down on him. He was exhausted, but sleep didn't come easily. Tomorrow, it would all repeat. Another day spent wandering the streets, collecting scraps, earning just enough to scrape by. But Jake knew he couldn't give up. He whispered into the darkness, his voice barely audible. "I'll change this life. I have to change it." The first light of dawn barely touched the rooftops when Jake left the alley, his empty bag swinging by his side. He tightened the strap, trying to shield himself from the early morning chill. His thin shirt clung to his skin, useless against the cold. His shoes were worn almost to the soles, each step on the wet ground from last night's rain growing more and more painful. Every step Jake took was calculated. He knew exactly where to go to find something of value. First stop, the public square. There were always overflowing trash bins there. Maybe something useful had been thrown away. He approached one of the large bins, bent down, and began rummaging through the mess. Just as his hand brushed against an intact aluminum can, a gruff voice called out behind him. "Hey kid, what are you doing over there?" Jake froze. He slowly lifted his head, meeting the gaze of a large man in a security guard uniform. The man's face was stern, his eyes filled with annoyance. Jake swallowed hard. "I'm just picking up things no one needs anymore." The guard's face hardened. "This bin isn't for you. Get out of here before I call the cops." He crossed his arms, his stare a clear warning. Jake felt the familiar sting of shame rise in his chest, but he didn't argue. He lowered his head, quickly picked up his bag, and walked away. When Jake arrived at the alley, the sun had already set behind the tall buildings. The air felt much colder than it had in the morning. Sarah was sitting curled up, wrapped in the old blanket Jake had left for her before he went out. She looked up as he walked in. "You're late today." Jake smiled and sat down next to his mother. "I met someone today who helped me a lot." He opened his bag and started pulling out what he had gathered. But the most valuable thing Jake had found today wasn't in that bag. He smiled gently. "His name's Tommy. He taught me how to do this better." Sarah nodded quietly, a tired smile flickering across her face. Even though she was exhausted from waiting all day, she felt a sense of relief. It's good to know there are still good people out there. "Yeah," Jake agreed, then sat down next to her, opening his bag and starting to sort the things he'd collected. Today was better than yesterday. Tomorrow will be even better. He focused on sorting the things he'd be selling the next day, while Sarah silently watched. Though they were still struggling, there was something different in Jake's eyes tonight, a spark of determination, even a bit of hope. But Jake knew well that the promise of a brighter tomorrow never came easily. He was used to challenges, and he was ready to face whatever came to protect that hope. Jake's legs ached as he trudged across the bridge, the bag on his shoulder heavy with the things he'd collected that day. The sun had long since disappeared, leaving the city bathed in the cold glow of artificial lights. Each breath turned to mist in the chilly air, but Jake didn't mind. His mind was focused on Sarah, how she was doing, whether she had eaten, and why she had looked so weak this morning. The bridge was quiet, only the occasional sound of a passing car. Jake liked this moment of the day, his footsteps steady on the concrete, the sound helping him think, helping him dream. He stopped in the middle of the bridge, resting his hand on the railing, looking down at the city below. The lights from the buildings and cars sparkled like stars in the artificial night sky. Jake imagined a different life, a small apartment for him and his mother, hot meals, and no more digging through trash every day. Then a sound interrupted his thoughts, a muffled sob. Jake furrowed his brow. He strained his ears, listening closely. A cry, a solitary, desperate sound echoed somewhere at the end of the bridge. Jake froze. He listened intently, his heart pounding in his chest. The air around him was still, only the wind howling through the bridge's railing. Jake turned his head toward the source of the sound. At the far end of the bridge, a figure stood precariously by the railing. It was an older man. His shoulders were hunched, his legs trembling as though he were carrying an invisible burden, much heavier than the bag Jake was carrying. Jake hesitated. He wasn't sure what to do or say, but something inside him wouldn't let him walk away. He tightened his grip on the bag and carefully stepped forward. "Sir!" he called, his voice trembling slightly. The man didn't respond. He didn't move at all. Jake quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you okay?" The man finally turned his head, just enough for Jake to see his face. His eyes were bloodshot, deep circles beneath them. His cheeks were wet with tears. His lips trembled as he muttered, "Go away, kid. This isn't your business." Jake swallowed hard, his mind in a swirl. He could feel that this situation was heavier than anything he had ever faced before. "It is my business," Jake said, his voice more certain than before. He took another step forward. "I don't know what's going on, but you shouldn't be standing here alone like this. It's cold and dangerous." The man let out a bitter laugh. "Dangerous?" He gripped the railing tighter, his fingers turning white from the pressure. "That's exactly what I want." A strong gust of wind swept through, making his coat flap wildly. Jake's stomach twisted. "You don't have to do this," he shouted, his voice cracking from the tension. He dropped his bag to the ground and reached out toward the man, though he still kept a safe distance. "Whatever's going on, it can still get better," he said quickly, afraid that if he hesitated for even a second, the man in front of him would disappear from this world forever. "My mom always says, as long as we're alive, we can still fight." This time, the man turned completely around, his eyes filled with despair. Fight? For what? The figure on the bridge trembled in the wind. Jake stepped closer, his heart pounding with each step. He realized the man was holding on to the railing, his body swaying as if a single gust of wind could send him plunging into the cold waters below. "Sir, are you okay?" No reply. Jake took another step forward, his voice shaking with worry. "Please don't do this. There's always a way out." This time, the man slightly turned his head. His face was gaunt, his eyes red, his cheeks soaked with tears. "You don't understand." His voice was hoarse, as if he had lost all hope. "I have nothing left. My family, my home, everything is gone. There's no reason to keep going." Jake fell silent. He didn't know anything about this man's life, but he understood that feeling. The feeling of loss. The feeling of helplessness. "I've lost a lot too," he said softly. The man furrowed his brow, confused. Jake took a deep breath and continued.
My dad left a long time ago. My mom's really sick. Every day I wander around picking up trash just so we can eat. But I keep going, because if I give up, who's going to take care of my mom? The man stared at Jake, as if he were battling with himself. You can't give up now, Jake said, stepping forward. His hand was still extended, but not forcefully. I don't know who you are, but I'm sure someone once needed you. And if you end it now, you'll never know what tomorrow could bring. A heavy silence stretched out, suffocating the air. Then, slowly, the man loosened his grip on the railing. He stepped back, his shoulders sagging as if all his strength had drained away. Jake rushed forward, gently taking his arm and guiding him away from the edge of the bridge. Let's sit down for a bit. They both sat down on the cold concrete, leaning back against the railing. He trembled, burying his face in his hands, choking sobs echoing through the darkness. Jake said nothing more. He just silently stayed beside him. After a while, the man spoke softly. My name is John. Jake looked up at him, blinking. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Then he realized. John. He was the millionaire everyone in town used to talk about, but now he was left with nothing but empty hands and a broken heart. Jake had risked his life to save a millionaire, but what he didn't know was that tomorrow, this moment would change his life forever. John lifted his head slightly, staring into the dim light of the street lamps. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I'm Jake, the boy responded, his voice steady, even though his throat felt tight. I don't have all the answers, but I think maybe talking might help a little. John looked at him, his eyes seeming to search for something in Jake's face. For the first time, a glimmer of light passed through his eyes, maybe curiosity or perhaps a faint flicker of hope. He nodded slowly. All right, Jake, I'll talk. And under the faint streetlight, John began to tell his story. Jake listened intently, temporarily forgetting his own burdens, just focusing on the man beside him. John's voice trembled as he started, his words heavy with sorrow and regret. Jake remained patient, listening carefully, even though his arms and legs ached. He stayed by the man's side on the cold concrete of the bridge. I wasn't always like this, John said, his gaze fixed on the ground, as though the memories were etched into it. I had a family, my wife, my daughter. We lived in a big house, had everything we needed, but I was too consumed with work. I thought I was providing for them, but the truth was, I wasn't there at all. Jake nodded, his eyes momentarily clouded with sadness. He couldn't even imagine the feeling of losing Sarah completely. I thought I had everything figured out, but I became a stranger to them, John continued, his voice breaking. Until it was too late. My wife left, took my daughter with her.
I thought there'd be time to make things right, but his words caught in his throat. He took a deep breath, trying to suppress his emotions. There was an accident. A trunk driver. They were gone. Just like that. Jake felt his chest tighten. The pain he carried reflected in John's words. He didn't know what to say, so he stayed silent, letting John continue. After that, I stopped caring about anything. Lost my job, my house, everything. And tonight, John's voice lowered as he glanced at the bridge's railing. Tonight, I thought maybe it's time to stop fighting. You don't have to be like this, Jake said gently, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. I know everything feels hopeless right now, but there's always something worth holding on to. Someone needs you? Like who? John asked bitterly. I'm just a shell of the man I used to be. No one remembers me anymore. I do, Jake replied, his voice firm. And I think you can help someone like me. John looked at him, his expression hesitant, a hint of confusion. Help you? What do you mean? Jake was silent for a moment, unsure of how to say what was in his heart. But there was something about John, something in the brokenness they both shared that made Jake feel safe enough to open up. My mom's sick. She's really weak, and I'm the only one taking care of her. I spend my days picking up cans and bottles, trying to get enough money for food and medicine. Sometimes it feels like I'm sinking, like I'll never catch up. But I can't give up, because she needs me. John looked at Jake, his face softening. You're just a kid. You shouldn't have to carry all this. Jake met his gaze, his eyes reflecting a thoughtfulness beyond his years. Maybe not, but I have to. And if I can find a reason to keep going, you can too. Maybe we'll figure out a way together. Neither of them spoke for a while. The city murmured around them, the strange and cold sounds, both comforting and harsh. John rubbed his hands together, as if trying to find some warmth in the night air. You're wise beyond your years, he finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I can do to help you, but I'll try. Jake smiled faintly, a sense of relief swelling in his chest. That's all anyone can ask for. They sat there for a while longer, the air around them feeling a little less heavy. John's shoulders, once hunched in defeat, began to straighten as he leaned against the railing. Jake, though exhausted, felt a strange sense of peace, as though for the first time in a long while he wasn't facing the darkness alone. As the cold sharpened, Jake stood up and extended his hand to John. Let's go. It's late. Let me take you somewhere safe. John hesitated for a moment, then finally grasped Jake's hand. Together, they left the bridge, walking side by side along the dimly lit streets. The road ahead was murky, but for now, they had each other, and that was enough.
The alley was quieter than usual when Jake and John arrived. John slowed his pace as they neared the small makeshift tent. His eyes scanned the surroundings, a clear anxiety creeping into his expression. The sight of tattered tarps and scattered belongings painted a grim picture, a portrait of lives forgotten long ago. Jake knew this feeling well. Is this where you live? John asked softly, his voice carrying a trace of surprise. Jake nodded, setting his bag down by the entrance. Yeah, not much, but at least the wind doesn't come in at night. My mom's inside. John stopped, his gaze lingering on the tent for a moment. Does your mom know you're out this late working? Jake shrugged. She knows. She's too sick to work, and medicine isn't cheap, so I do what I can. Without waiting for a response, Jake bent down and called softly into the tent. Mom, I'm home. Sarah stirred on the thin mattress, her face pale, sweat dripping down her forehead. When her eyes fluttered open, a faint smile appeared. You're so late, she whispered, her voice fragile. Jake sat beside her gently, responding in a quiet tone. I know, but I brought someone back. He helped me tonight. He gestured toward the door, signaling for John to enter. The older man bent slightly to squeeze inside, his large frame awkward and stiff as he adjusted to the cramped space. Sarah looked at John, her eyes widening a bit as she took in his presence. Who is he? Jake quickly explained. I met him on the bridge. He needed help too. John seemed embarrassed, unsure of what to say. Sorry to intrude, he muttered, his voice low. Your son, he's a special one. He has more courage than most men I've met. Sarah's gaze softened as she looked at Jake. He gets it from his father, she said quietly, a faint, bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. Although his father forgot how to use it. Jake busied himself with opening his bag, not wanting to dive into the subject of his father. I'll make some soup, he said, pulling out a dented can. It's not much, but we'll share. As Jake worked, John sat cross-legged near Sarah, his hand resting gently on his knee.
After a long pause, he spoke, his tone deeper. "You're lucky to have him," he said. "He does more than most grown men." Sarah's smile faded. "I know, and I hate that. He deserves more than this, more than I can give him."
Jake glanced at his mom, a soft warning in his eyes. "Mom, don't start that again. We have what we need, and now we have John here." John looked from Jake to Sarah, his voice firm. "He's right," he said. "I won't let you two be alone anymore, if you'll allow me. I want to help." Sarah blinked, her eyes narrowing slightly with exhaustion. "Help how? I have nothing left." John sighed deeply. "I don't have much, but I've got a little money. Not enough to change the world, but I can do something here. Food, medicine, some decent clothes, those are things I can help with." Jake stood frozen, still holding the unopened soup can in his hand. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." John looked him squarely in the eye, his face earnest. "Because someone once gave me a second chance, and I wasted it. When I saw you three tonight, I remembered everything I lost, and everything I could still do if I had a shot. If I can help you and your mom, maybe it will mean something." Sarah's eyes welled up, but she shook her head. "We can't accept this. I don't want Jake to feel like we're just living off the pity of others." "It's not charity," John said firmly. "It's a partnership." He turned to Jake. "You've done more for me than you realize. And, I think, maybe, this helps both of us find a reason to keep going." Jake set the soup down and moved to sit beside Sarah, gently taking her hand. His small fingers wrapped around hers. "Mom, we need this. You need this." Sarah looked at him, her gaze a mix of love and pain. Finally, she nodded. "All right. For you, I'll accept." John sighed in relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Good. Tomorrow, I'll go get some supplies. Real food, proper medicine. We'll figure it out." For the first time in a long while, Jake felt a flicker of hope. As he prepared the soup, he couldn't help but glance at John, sitting quietly with a look of quiet resolve. Maybe, just maybe, things would change. As the three of them shared the modest meal, the tent seemed a little warmer. The wind still howled outside, but inside the tent there was a new sense of purpose. Jake didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, he didn't feel quite so alone. Morning light filtered through the thin fabric of the tent, casting pale yellow streaks over Sarah as she slept. Jake woke up, his body aching from spending the night on the hard ground. He slowly sat up, careful not to wake his mother, then looked outside the tent. John sat just outside, his back against the alley wall. The older man held a small notebook, its pages worn and edges ragged.
Jake rubbed his eyes and stepped outside. "Didn't you sleep?" he asked. John shook his head, his gaze fixed on the notebook. "I haven't slept in years," he confessed, his voice low. "Too many thoughts, too many regrets." Jake sat down next to him, the cold morning air biting at his skin. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the notebook. John hesitated, then handed it to him. "This is all that's left of my old life," he said. "Addresses, ideas of things I should have done. I've carried it with me, even when I didn't know why." Jake flipped through the pages, most of them neatly written. Among the lists and notes were names circled, addresses crossed out, and hurried scribbles like "not enough time" or "seems important." "It looks important," Jake said, handing the notebook back to John. "It is," John replied, carefully slipping it back into his coat. "But now I think it's time to start over." They sat in silence for a while, the city slowly waking around them. The sound of cars and footsteps echoed through the alley. Finally, John stood up, brushing the dust off his coat. "Let's go,"
We've got work to do. This should help her throat, John said, holding up a small jar of honey. Jake stared at the pile of items in his hands, still unable to believe it was real. Is this really necessary? Are you sure you have enough money? Jake asked, his voice laced with concern. John nodded, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. This is what needs to be done. Don't worry about the money. They walked to a pharmacy where John bought a small bag of medicine. He scanned the labels, carefully checking to ensure it matched the symptoms Jake had described. Every choice was made with deep consideration. When they returned to the tent, Jake's arms were full of the things John had bought, and he could hardly believe it was real. They stepped into the tent, where Sarah was awake. Her frail body leaned against a pile of old clothes, her eyes wide in surprise when she saw the pile of items. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice hoarse but filled with wonder. "It's for you," John replied, gently placing the bags down. "Jake told me about your condition. These things will help." Sarah stared at the pile, then back at John. Her eyes filled with tears, but she couldn't say anything. Words failed her.
I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to thank me," John said softly. "Just focus on getting better." Jake unpacked the items, noticing the small smile at the corner of his mother's mouth, a fragile smile, but the first one he'd seen in weeks. John handed her a warm cup of tea with some honey. Sarah took slow sips, each one seeming to ease her body, the tension melting away with every sip. In the days that followed, John became an integral part of their lives. He brought more supplies, repaired the rotting sections of the tent, and even found an old blanket to keep Sarah warm each night. Jake watched his mother grow stronger with each passing day. Her coughing fits lessened, and the color returned to her skin. Yet despite all this, Jake struggled with accepting so much help from John. One evening, as John was sharpening an old knife he'd found, Jake approached him, his gaze filled with curiosity. "Why are you doing this?" Jake asked, his voice cautious. "You've already done so much. You don't have to do more." John looked up, his face thoughtful. "I've asked myself that very question," he admitted, his eyes tinged with reflection. "At first, it was because of guilt. I thought I needed to pay for all the wasted years. But now I see it's not just that. There's another reason." "Another reason?" Jake asked, squinting, searching for the answer. John smiled gently, a fleeting but profound smile. "Maybe it's because I think there's still something worth fighting for. You, your mom, have given me a reason to care again, a reason to live." Jake fell silent, his thoughts swirling in his head. Finally, he nodded, his voice low but sincere. "Thank you for everything." John placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, saying nothing more, but his gaze was warm and reassuring. "No need to thank me, son. Just promise me one thing. Don't ever give up, no matter how hard it gets." Jake looked him in the eye, his voice steady. "I won't give up." The next day, John announced a new plan. He was going to get Jake and Sarah out of this alley. "This is not a home," John said, his voice firm. "You and your mother need a real place. There's a room a few blocks away, small but clean and safe. I'll cover the rent for now." Sarah initially resisted. Her pride made it hard to accept help, but seeing Jake's determination to change their lives, she relented. Together, they packed up their few belongings and left the alley for good.
When they arrived at the small room, a strange sense of relief washed over them, like stepping into a new world full of possibilities. The simple walls, the sparse furniture, yet to Jake, it was paradise. For the first time in years, they had a door that could be locked, an actual bed for Sarah, and enough space to breathe.
As Jake sat on the edge of the bed, watching Sarah sleep peacefully, he turned to John. "I don't know how to thank you," Jake said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You don't need to thank me," John replied, his tone warm. "Just take care of each other. That's all I ask." Jake nodded, his heart swelling with appreciation. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel hopeless. This room was a refuge, so different from the cold, cramped tent in the alley. To Jake, it was a dream come true. Solid walls against the wind, a small but fully equipped kitchen where they could cook warm meals, and Sarah had a proper bed to rest in without shivering through the night. John even found a small table and mismatched chairs, giving the space an air of normalcy. But with comfort came complications. It started with the whispers of the neighbors. Conversations began to spread through the narrow hallways about John's relationship with Jake and Sarah. Tenants exchanged skeptical glances and whispered behind their backs. "He's too generous. No one does that without expecting something in return," one neighbor remarked when Jake passed by, his arms loaded with groceries John had bought. Another nodded in agreement. Maybe he's trying to make up for something he did. Jake pretended not to hear, but the murmurs sliced through him like sharp knives. He carried the bags upstairs, jaw clenched, determined not to let the gossip bother him. But as he entered the room, he saw John standing by the window, his face tight with frustration. "They're talking about me, aren't they?" he asked, not turning around. Jake hesitated for a moment before nodding. "A few people, but it's fine. They don't understand you like we do." John sighed and turned to face him. "People will always criticize when they don't understand. But I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for you and your mom. I know. That's why we trust you." Though Jake's reassurance didn't fully ease the unease in John's heart, the gossip kept spreading beyond the building. John began to notice curious eyes following him as he walked through the neighborhood. Once, after picking up Sarah's medication from the pharmacy, a woman approached him. "You're John, right?" she asked, her voice cold.
"Yes," John replied, cautious. "I've heard about you," she continued. "Helping those people just out of kindness, huh? Sounds too good to be true. What's your agenda?" John stiffened. "My agenda is simple," he said flatly. "They needed help, so I helped." She scoffed. "No one's that selfless." John didn't react, continuing on his way, refusing to let her words shake him further. But the doubts lingered in his mind. That evening, as they shared a quiet dinner in the room, John finally spoke up about it. "Jake," his voice was low, serious. "Have you heard what people are saying? They're claiming I'm doing this for some selfish reason." Jake frowned, his eyes betraying his irritation. "Yeah, I've heard a few things. But it doesn't matter. We know the truth." "It matters," John said, his face clouded with thought. "Not because of what they think about me, but because it could affect you and your mother. If people start seeing you both as charity cases, they'll treat you differently." Sarah, sitting on the bed with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, spoke for the first time. "Let them think what they want. Their opinions don't feed us, they don't keep us warm. What you've done for us, John, that's what matters. That's the real thing." Her words seemed to soften the tension in John's expression, but Jake could still see the worry etched deep on his face. The next day, the pressure hit its peak. A local reporter appeared outside their building, camera in tow. She stopped John as he returned from grocery shopping. "Mr. John," the reporter called out loudly, microphone aimed directly at him. "We've heard about your generous charity work with this struggling family. Could you tell us why you're doing this?" John froze. The weight of the question settled on his shoulders like a stone. The camera zoomed in on his face, waiting for a response. He glanced toward the window where Jake stood, observing. Taking a deep breath, he turned back to face the reporter. "I'm helping them because I know what it feels like to lose everything. I've made mistakes in my life, and if I can do something good now, I will. Not for redemption or pity, but because it's the right thing to do." The reporter raised an eyebrow, her skepticism clear. "Sure." Jake stood in silence, his eyes lowered to the ground, hands clenched tightly. The words of his classmates still echoed in his mind, like an unhealing slap that wouldn't fade away.
"You're just the charity cases kid," one of them had mocked.
Bet you love getting free stuff, huh? Anger rose inside him, but Jake didn't react. He remained silent, his hands tightened to fists, only his trembling lips betraying the internal struggle he was fighting. "It's not like that," he replied, his voice calm but taut with tension. "You don't understand my life." A sneer followed before they walked away, but those words cut deeper than anything physical. Jake stood still, his body rigid as stone, eyes fixed on something far off, feeling abandoned, cornered, as if he were being defined by the very help they had received. A wound began to fester in his mind, one that would take time to heal. When he returned home, he recounted the incident to John and Sarah. John didn't speak immediately. Only when he placed a hand on Jake's shoulder did he let out a heavy sigh, as if underlining each word. The world is full of people who hurt others just to feel higher. But you, Jake, you're stronger than that, and you don't owe them an explanation. John's words felt like a warm blanket, easing the cold chill of Jake's shame and confusion. The weight on his chest lifted, but he couldn't deny the wound still lingered deep inside. John's reminder, his reassurance, was a beacon in the storm, a call to not let the noise of others drown the quiet strength inside him. But the truth was, not everyone viewed kindness with open arms. Some of the neighbors began to soften, smiling when they saw John, their greetings warmer, less guarded. But there were still eyes that lingered, doubt behind them like a silent shadow. The skepticism was palpable, hanging in the air, just waiting to burst. School wasn't immune to this undercurrent. The whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle sneers, it all made Jake feel like he was losing himself. But John wouldn't let him slip into despair. To John, what mattered most was that they, as a family, lived with integrity and didn't let the darkness of other people's judgments taint the light in their hearts. As the weight of those attacks grew heavier, John stood unwavering beside Jake. "They don't understand," John said quietly, his voice firm but full of compassion. "But you need to know something. Don't let their words break you. You have the strength to rise above." John's words were a gust of wind in the sails of Jake's weary soul, reminding him that no matter how hard the road, there was always a way through. Jake nodded, the sting of their words still fresh, but he could feel the resolve building within him. He looked over at Sarah, her health improving each day, and the fire of determination flared up in him. They had come so far already, he wouldn't let the cruel whispers hold them back. That night, John sat by the window, his gaze distant. Despite all the challenges that still lay ahead, he felt something he hadn't in years, a sense of purpose. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was part of something meaningful, and he wasn't about to let that slip through his fingers.
Inside their small home, the tension never quite went away. The sideways glances from neighbors, the lingering doubts from classmates, they were constant, a low hum of judgment that never ceased. John's open acts of charity had diminished some of the suspicion, but the quiet murmurs still buzzed at school. Jake continued to face cold stares, and John, at home, often caught the curious eyes of neighbors watching from behind closed curtains. Sarah, too, was still wrestling with the shame of accepting help. For her, it was an ongoing battle she wasn't sure she could ever win. One afternoon, Jake came home from school. He pushed open the door and found John sitting at the small table, a piece of paper in his hand. His face was tense, the usual wrinkles in his brow deeper than usual. "What's going on?" Jake asked, dropping his bag by the door. John looked up, attempting a light smile. "Just a letter," he said, folding the paper neatly. "Nothing to worry about." Jake didn't press, but he could feel the weight in the air. Before he could speak, Sarah's voice came from the bed, soft but insistent. "Jake, come sit with me." Jake crossed the room and sat beside Sarah, his eyes full of quiet concern. Though her health was improving, there was still a void in her that couldn't be filled. She turned to him, her eyes full of unspoken words. I still feel like a burden. Every time I accept help, it feels like I'm taking something from someone else, but I don't know what else to do."
Jake glanced back and forth between them, his throat tightening, unable to speak. He wanted to believe, wanted to find some spark of hope, but that hope seemed so far out of reach. That evening, John left the room to take care of a few things. He returned hours later, carrying an old but sturdy toolbox. "We're going to fix this room," John announced, placing the box on the table. Sarah gave him a skeptical look. "Fix it? Fix it how?" John smiled, his eyes unwavering. "You and your daughter deserve more than just getting by. This room, this life, it needs to feel like a home." In the days that followed, their small space began to transform. John went to work, patching up cracks in the walls, cleaning the windows until they gleamed, even finding an old but cozy rug to cover the cold floor. The room slowly came to life. The warmth, the sense of renewal, didn't just come from the things, but from the effort and care John poured into it. Though challenges still lay ahead, the room had become more than just a shelter. It had become a place where they could truly live, even if only for a moment. Jake helped in whatever way he could, learning how to hold a hammer properly, mixing paint. Though Sarah was still recovering, she was determined, carefully folding the curtains John had brought and making sure they hung just right. As they worked, their bond deepened. John often shared stories from his past, stories of regret, but also moments of redemption,
Happiness. Jake listened intently, finding comfort in the realization that even someone as strong as John had faced hardship and persevered. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, John made a suggestion. "We need to find a way to give back." Jake looked up, surprised. "Give back to who?" "To the world," John replied, his gaze serious. "There are so many people out there who need help, just like you and Sarah. If we can help, even with small things, it will make a difference." Sarah nodded slowly. "What do you have in mind?" "I've talked to a few old friends of mine, people who have resources they aren't using, clothes, food, even old furniture. I think we can start gathering those things and give them to people who need them." Jake's eyes lit up as if he had just discovered a new flame. "A community project?" "Exactly," John smiled. "Something to remind people that kindness still exists." In the weeks that followed, they worked tirelessly to bring John's idea to life. Word spread quickly, and before long, donations started pouring in. At first, it was just a few old clothes, a couple of food boxes, but gradually the amount grew. A small community had formed, all with one goal: to share and help each other. This change didn't just come from material goods, it came from the human spirit. John, Jake, and Sarah had not only transformed their own home, but they had brought new hope to those around them. Unity, kindness, and the spirit of giving spread like wildfire, brightening up the entire neighborhood. It started small: a few bags of clothes, a box of food, and some basic supplies. But as the project grew, so did the support. Neighbors who had once been skeptical now volunteered to help sort and distribute the items. The work was far from easy. Some people doubted their motives, thinking they were just trying to attract attention or make a profit from it, while others remained indifferent, not caring about their efforts. But for every skeptic, two more stepped forward, offering gratitude, their lives touched by the kindness of strangers. One day, as they were stacking supply boxes, Tommy, the homeless man Jake had met a few months earlier, appeared at the door. His weathered face broke into a rare smile as he scanned the room. "You're all doing great. Really great," Tommy said, giving Jake a light pat on the shoulder. Jake smiled back. "I couldn't do it without John and you."
Tommy chuckled, a deep, raspy laugh. "You got a good heart, kid. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the evening wore on, the small group sat together, reflecting on how far they had come. Sarah, her health gradually improving, watched Jake and John laughing with Tommy, a soft smile on her face. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. For John, this project had given him something he thought he had lost forever: a sense of purpose. As he looked at Jake's determined face, a spark of hope ignited in his chest, the faint glimmer of a brighter future. The journey wasn't over. There were still challenges to face, biases to overcome, and wounds to heal. But right now, they were united, stronger than ever before. They had never felt this together. Months had passed since John, Jake, and Sarah began their project. What started as a small effort to distribute food and clothes had now blossomed into a bustling hub of community activity. Their modest apartment was now a storage and distribution center, with volunteers coming and going throughout the day. The space was always full of movement, sorting relief items, packing supplies, or simply sharing stories over a cup of tea. Jake realized he was thriving in this new environment. At school, the mocking from his classmates had quieted, replaced by curiosity. Even Mr. Harris, the teacher, had invited him to speak to the class about his experiences. At first, Jake hesitated. He didn't know how much to share or if anyone would even care to listen. On the day of the presentation, Jake stood in front of the class, his hands trembling slightly. He took a deep breath and began. "Hello, everyone. I'm Jake," he said, his voice gaining steadiness with each word. "For most of my life, my mom and I lived in an alley. She was sick, and I had to figure out how to take care of both of us. That's when I met John. He gave us a chance, helped us find a home, and taught me that even when everything seems impossible, there's always a way to keep going." The classroom fell into complete silence as Jake shared his story. He spoke about the project they had started, about how the smallest actions could lead to massive change. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Even the classmates who had once mocked him looked impressed. After the presentation, Mr. Harris approached Jake. "You've been through more than most adults, Jake, and you've turned it into something meaningful. That takes strength." Jake smiled, a surge of pride rushing through him. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel out of place at school. Meanwhile, John was facing his own set of challenges. The attention their project had garnered attracted media interest. Reporters began visiting their apartment, eager to share their story. But with fame came scrutiny. One afternoon, after returning from a meeting with a potential donor, John found a man standing outside. Inside the apartment, the man was dressed sharply in a well-tailored suit. The stranger introduced himself as David Mason, a representative from a well-known charity organization. "We've heard about your work," David began, his tone polite but firm. "It's admirable. However, we have some concerns about the sustainability of these efforts." "Sustainability?" John raised an eyebrow. "Yes," David replied, taking a step closer. "While it's commendable, projects like this often lack structure. They rely too much on personal effort, and they can collapse under pressure. We want to take over, provide funding, and manage things properly." John stared at him, his jaw tight. "You're suggesting we hand over control to you?" David nodded. "That's the only way to ensure sustainability." "Sustainability isn't about control," John said firmly, his voice unwavering. "It's about trust, about people coming together for what they believe in, not because they're following orders." David's expression hardened. "Think about it, Mr. John. Your intentions are noble, but the scale of this work requires professionals." He handed John a business card and left. John clenched the card in his hand, crumpling it. The sense of resolve inside him only grew stronger. That evening, he shared the meeting with Jake and Sarah. "What did you say to him?" Jake asked, eyes wide. "I said no," John replied, his tone resolute. "This isn't about money or management. It's about people helping each other." Sarah nodded in agreement. "They don't understand what we've built here. This isn't just a project, it's a family." Despite the opposition, their project continued to grow. More and more volunteers joined, donations flooded in, and the community around them began to come together. John worked tirelessly, often setting his own needs aside to keep everything running smoothly. Sarah, now healthier, began organizing support groups for women in similar situations, sharing her story to inspire others. One evening, after a long day of work, John looked at Jake. "You've grown so much," he said, his voice unusually soft. "Your mom and I couldn't be prouder." Jake smiled, his heart full of gratitude. "It's because of you. You gave us a chance."
"No," John replied. "You gave me a chance. You reminded me of what it means to truly live." The next day, John held a press conference to address the increasing media attention. Standing before a crowd of reporters and community members, he spoke with unwavering determination. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about all of us. About the boy who refused to give up, the mother who fought to survive, and the neighbors who opened their hearts. This is proof that we don't need to wait for someone else to fix things. We can start right here, right now, with what we have." The speech was met with a thunderous round of applause. Jake stood watching, his heart swelling with pride and admiration. John, now more than a mentor, had become a symbol of hope. The media attention brought more support, but it also came with new challenges. Balancing the influx of donations, volunteers, and people's expectations became a daily struggle. Yet through it all, their bond remained unshaken. As the weeks turned into months, their apartment no longer felt like a temporary shelter. It had transformed into a beacon, a place where lives had been changed and hope restored. For Jake, Sarah, and John, it was no longer just a home. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Months passed since John, Jake, and Sarah first met in that cold alley. What had started as a desperate struggle for survival had blossomed into a vibrant community effort, one that now stretched far beyond their small apartment. The cramped room they once shared had been replaced by a modest community center, with walls painted in bright colors, shelves stocked with supplies, and tables where people gathered to share meals and stories. Jake, now taller and more confident, stood at the entrance of the center, greeting visitors arriving for the fundraising event that evening. He was taller, his posture strong, yet his warm smile and humble demeanor remained unchanged. Sarah, fully recovered, bustled around the room, coordinating donations with a team of volunteers. She radiated energy and purpose. The fragile woman she once was had become a symbol of resilience. In a corner of the room, John sat at a small table, reviewing paperwork for the event. His hair had turned completely gray, and his movements were slower than before, but the strength in his presence remained unchanged. He watched Jake interact with the guests, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "You've built something really incredible here," Tommy said, sitting across from John. The former street hustler had become a trusted ally over the years, his streetwise intelligence an invaluable part of their efforts.
"I didn't do it alone," John replied, his gaze lingering on Jake. "That boy gave me a second chance when I didn't think I deserved it." Tommy nodded. "You gave him a second chance too, didn't you? That's how it works, right? We pull each other up." As the night wore on, the fundraiser turned into a celebration. Guests shared stories of how the center had changed their lives. A single mother spoke about the support she received after losing her job. An elderly man reminisced about how the center had helped him find shelter after years on the streets. Each story was a testament to the power of kindness and community. Jake stepped onto the stage, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "When we started this journey, it was just me, my mom, and John. We didn't have much, just hope and the belief that things would get better. What you see here today is proof that no matter how dark things get, we can still create light, if we do it together." The room erupted in applause, cheers echoing through the space. John sat there, his heart filled with pride. Sarah stood nearby, wiping away a tear as the ceremony drew to a close. Jake walked over to John, sitting beside him, noticing the older man's quiet demeanor. "You okay?" he asked, sensing the silence from John. "I'm more than okay. I'm proud of you and your mom, of everything we've done." Jake leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping over the room. "We couldn't have done it without you." "No," John shook his head. "You had the fire in you. I just added a little fuel." They sat in silence, watching Sarah laugh with a group of volunteers. The center was buzzing with energy, a living testament to the lives that had been changed. As guests began to trickle out and the volunteers started cleaning up, John pulled Jake aside. "There's something I need to say to you." His voice was gentle. Jake frowned. "What is it, Uncle?" John hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I'm getting old. There are things I just can't do as well as I used to. It's time for you to take the lead." Jake's eyes widened. "What? Uncle, we need you." "You don't need me," John said firmly. "You've grown into a leader. This center, this community, it's yours now. I believe you'll take it further than I ever could." Jake swallowed hard, his emotions rising up, nearly drowning out his thoughts. I don't know if I can do this without you."
You can. John placed a hand on his shoulder. You will, because you're not alone. You've got your mom and everyone in this room. John smiled, looking at Jake. You've built something that will last. Jake nodded, his resolve strengthening. I'll make you proud, Uncle. I already have, John replied, a soft smile tugging at his lips. The following months saw Jake step into his new role as the center's leader. John remained by his side, offering advice and support whenever necessary, but gradually he began to pull back, content as he watched the legacy they had built together continue to grow. One peaceful afternoon, John sat on a bench outside the center, watching the children play in the nearby park. Sarah approached him, handing him a cup of tea. You've changed so many lives, Sarah said, her voice warm, including ours. John smiled faintly. I think it's you and Jake who've changed my life. Sarah returned the smile. Maybe that's how it was meant to be. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Jake joined them, sitting at the edge of the bench. The three of them sat in silence, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They had come so far, and though the future remained uncertain, they embraced it with unwavering hope. The center continued to grow, touching countless lives, proving that even in the darkest moments, compassion could light the way. And for John, Jake, and Sarah, their bond was a reminder that family isn't just blood. It's those who stand by you, no matter the circumstances. So, if you were in John's shoes, would you truly be ready to let go and pass everything on to someone else? Have you ever faced such a tough decision in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story could inspire others and help them overcome similar challenges. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with friends and family so we can spread the message about growth and the important decisions we make in life. Remember, every step you take on this journey matters and will help you grow stronger. Wishing you strength and success on your path. This content is entirely fictional. It is a story created based on hypothetical scenarios and is not related to any real individuals or organizations. All details in the video are intended to offer diverse perspectives and have been edited with the assistance of AI. If there are any shortcomings, we kindly ask for your understanding.